Joining us now, Ali Velshi is now a global affairs and economics journalist. Now, you can follow Ali Velshi on Twitter. How do you do that? At Ali Velshi. How easy is that? It's so cool. At Ali Velshi. I like simple Twitter handles, like no underscores and things like that drive me nuts. Ali, good to have you with us, man.
Great to be back with you, John.
It's been way too long. I'm excited to have you on. I was thinking about it last night. When this whole thing went down, I'm like, I got to find Ali someplace. And then it was Friday night. I got to tell my audience this. And you were on CNN, right?
Well, I was on CNN this morning, yeah, and I'll be on for a little more this morning as well.
Anyway, I saw you somewhere on Friday night. That would have been
CNN, yeah.
CNN, you were on Friday night. I'm flipping the channels. I don't watch Fox News, right? Everybody knows that. Can't stand it. So I got CNN on, and there pops up Ali, and it's all these talking heads. And he was on for like 5 minutes, and I'm like, this guy is so spot on, right? He's like so right. So we're excited to have you on, Ali.
Thank you.
Look, number one, nobody saw this coming. Number two, now we got all the globalists wringing their hands saying what a disaster it's going to be, and it's going to be the end of the United Kingdom as we know it. Meantime, the Central Bank of England indoors, right? Good thing they didn't go to the euro and eliminate the pound. Give our audience your take on this whole thing.
Right. So twofold. One is the Leave campaign didn't really discuss the specificities of what the United Kingdom gets from being part of the Eurozone. This was much more a referendum about frustration, about haves versus have-nots, about elites versus the working class. And one thing that I've always pointed out, while I'm generally in favor of trade deals often hurt manufacturing workers or working class people in the more prosperous country. So in Canada and the United States, it did sort of hurt a lot of manufacturing workers. Then when it became NAFTA, it hurt some people. So we've never really addressed this. There's a frustration out there with the working class about both trade deals and elites. It's a frustration that we have right here in America. So what I think that Leave vote was answering a different question than the question actually answered. I don't think it was wise for the United Kingdom to vote itself out of the EU, but I think it's wise for politicians in the United Kingdom and in the United States to take notice of this group that has sort of fallen through the cracks over the last 15 or 20 years.
Well, look, there's no question. It was, just like you said, the elites and the establishment political class, which is part of the enablers of this whole thing. And then you look at average Britons that were seeing an influx of immigrants coming in. They had no really control over it. This was mandated by some bureaucrats in Brussels. Many people were seeing their country, the makeup of it changing. And then they were seeing their jobs going away.
But the makeup is the interesting part because the UK and Europe and the United States have flat to negative growth rates. So they actually need immigrants. Immigrants are a net economic positive for the United Kingdom. And that's a problem that they don't know how to fix. They don't have a high birth rate. So there's an impression that these immigrants... See, the UK's had three waves of immigrants, right? It had the post-colonial wave from the 60s to the 80s. So Indians, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Nigerians, all the colonial places that became not colonial. Then it had the EU immigration, and generally you saw that the Eastern European poor countries providing the greatest number of immigrants. You get Poles and Romanians and people like that. Now you've got an issue in the UK where working-class Brits have watched these post-colonial immigrants come in as working-class people and now get an education and go past them. You're seeing the same thing with this Eastern European wave, and now they're seeing this wave of refugees. So they do control their borders from a fear perspective, which is what was going on there. The UK is in a better position than any other European country because once you get into Greece, you can walk all the way to northern France or northern Germany or wherever you want to walk in Europe. You can't do that in the UK. Mm-hmm. Everybody who comes into the UK has to have a passport or an EU card. So the concept that danger was coming into their borders beyond their control wasn't the case, and the concept that immigration is bad for their economy wasn't the case. But you're right that they've seen their jobs lost over time. That's the most factually accurate part of the argument that the Leave campaign had, but I think that was a small part of it.
What were the other issues?
There was a sense of control. They were pointing at Brussels, which is the capital of the European Union, as a place which had some sort of control over them. Now, the EU doesn't really control anything. It controls, regulations about household appliances and things like that. Mm-hmm. The EU collects some money from Great Britain, about £350 million a week is what the Leave campaign said, but it gets some money back. Generally speaking, the richer countries in Europe, which are the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and others, are net contributors to the EU. They get less than they put in financially. So that was one of the big issues, that why are we subsidizing Spain and Italy and Greece and countries like that? But the control issue, again, was a bit contrived because every country in Europe is sovereign. They get to make their own decisions. Most people in Europe can identify their member of parliament, but they can't identify their member of the European Parliament. And over the last several years, EU funding has gone down, EU influence has gone down. So there was a sense of another country controlling us, and hence we have to take our country back. The problem with take our country back is it had many facets to it. To some people, it meant we don't want deals being made in Brussels or decisions being made in Brussels, but it had this undertone of let's take it back from the immigrants, and that's where it got a little misleading.
Let's go to the Scots now. They're saying, well, look, we want to have another referendum on getting out of the UK because, look, we voted 62 to 38% to stay in the EU. Ali, you look at the vote overall, and the big majorities rolled up by the Remain people were in the urban centers, London, Ireland, right, Scotland. But then you look at the heartland, and, it got hammered. Yeah. There were precincts where Leave was 80, 85%. It was unbelievable when you got out in the rural areas. What does that mean, and now what happens with Scotland?
So easy to compare to the United States, right? London is the New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Washington, Philadelphia combined, and everything else is the middle of the country. The middle of the country does not understand how immigrants and immigration has helped them and does not understand how these trade deals have helped them. So they're working in mills, in manufacturing plants. They're not quite getting that. Scotland voted in 2014 55 to 45 to stay with the United Kingdom. A very, very big part of that campaign, the Scotland Remain campaign, was that if you leave, you won't be part of the EU, and you'll have to renegotiate all of these trade deals with the EU. And that's what made a lot of people in Scotland vote to remain as part of the United Kingdom. Now they're saying, well, if we're not going to be in the EU in the first place, then we want to have another vote. And indications are that the nationalist movement, the independence movement in Scotland, has only strengthened since 2014. In fact, the government of Scotland, the parliament, is now pro-independence. Northern Ireland, as you know, has been looking to separate from England for, decades, for more than 100 years. And England fought a battle to keep them as part of, most Britons only learned the term terrorist through Northern Ireland battles. So they've been looking for an excuse to leave the whole time and to merge with the Republic of Ireland, which is a separate state, which is part of the EU. So both of them have a pretty strong argument now to say we want the trading relationships with Europe more than we want them with now what is the world's sixth largest economy. And by the way, if Scotland and Ireland were to leave, Britain would go further down the line as an economy, or England itself. So this is very, very complicated. Another matter that sort of wasn't calculated, that now this could lead to the dissolution of the United Kingdom. Again, John, I'm sympathetic to all views all around. I think it's a mistake. It was a mistake in the United Kingdom for the elites and the political class not to understand the valid frustrations of the working class. It is a mistake that we are making in the United States not to understand the valid frustrations of the working class. Everybody who was supporting Bernie Sanders, people who are supporting Trump, to some degree people who supported Ted Cruz, are part of this group that feels they're entirely detached from the elites and the decision makers in society. So what you saw in the UK was what I think was a somewhat ill-informed protest vote that's going to end up with a result that isn't going to be satisfactory to the very people who are angry enough to vote that way. But somebody should be taking notice of the fact that they're frustrated and their frustrations are real, and things should have been done to try to right that ship.
Well, they were tone deaf. There was no question about it.
Right, and that's all over the world, by the way. The ruling classes do tend to be a little bit tone deaf, and seems to be, I travel all over the world, John, and this does seem to be something I'm hearing. It used to be something I heard in what we call developing nations all the time, that the ruling class doesn't know what the working class is going through. We are increasingly hearing this in what we call developed countries now.
Especially as we move, or the elites want to push everybody towards a globalist economy as they scour the globe for cheap sources of labor, which is really at, the genesis of the whole thing. Yep. Ali, it's interesting you mentioned terrorism and Northern Ireland, because I'm old enough to remember when I grew up, there were no Islamist terrorists or Muslim terrorists or anything like that. It was the IRA. It was the Irish Republican Army. Remember that?
That's right.
I mean, that was the world's terrorists.
That is correct. You heard more from them. There were various groups around the world. There were Basque separatists. There was Carlos the Jackal, and the PLO every now and then would hijack a plane.
Right.
But that's what it was. Terrorism. The reason Britain is so well versed in fighting terrorism, the reason you don't see garbage cans in vulnerable places in London, is because they were battling the IRA for the longest time.
For the longest time.
Yeah, so that's. I mean, most kids who like U2 and Bono forget that was an Irish protest band. It was it was a protest band against the United Kingdom. Sunday Bloody Sunday, one of their most famous songs, was about the battle between the Northern Irish and England.
I remember there was an IRA, I guess, I'm not sure what it was, representatives in New York or something, and they would
Jerry Adams from Sinn Féin.
Jerry Adams, thank you. That's right. I couldn't remember the name, Jerry Adams. Boy, this goes back a long time. In my day, that was the face of terrorism.
That's right.
Yep,
that's right. So that's that's this Northern Ireland. I'm not even sure they were all hankering in recent years to get away from Britain. They finally made peace several years ago.
Right.
But this just reawakens that beast too. We forget in the United States that while we struggle in the United States with regionalism versus federalism and states' rights versus the federal government rights, they do in the UK too. The UK is 4 different countries at a minimum, if you don't count Gibraltar. It's Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland that make this group up, and it's only been a few hundred years. So they have their own issues, as does Europe. I mean, Europe 60, 70 years ago, they were killing each other.
Right.
So the idea that there's a trade deal in Europe with European countries that were warring factions for over 1,000 years is much more of an achievement than Canada having a trade deal with the U.S. having a trade deal with Canada and Mexico,
right.
Which have been friendly for almost all their history.
Right. Let's get to what the impact is in the U.S. election. Many of us thinking that the pollsters again in Britain were wrong. This was the second consecutive time. Nobody really saw the extent of the Leave vote. Even if it did win, everybody thought it was going to be a nail-biter. They won, handily 52-48. Some people thinking this portends well for Trump, just like Thatcher portended well for Reagan. And remember,
right.
Ali, if you go back to, what are we, in June 27th, you go back the last week in June of 1980, President Reagan was down to Jimmy Carter by 20 to 25, depending on what poll you looked at.
Yeah.
Now we've got Clinton ahead. It seems like the average is maybe 8 or 9. Is there a window to look into from Brexit that might affect the U.S. election in November?
So I can give you both arguments on this one. The one in favor of Hillary Clinton is that over the next few months you're going to see that while Britain would like to drag out this Brexit exit for some time, it's supposed to take 2 years, the Europeans are like, nope, you know what, you guys voted to leave, we want to get this thing done very quickly, and if Scotland puts pressure to leave and Northern Ireland puts pressure to leave, within 2 or 3 months this is going to look like perhaps not the best deal for the citizens of the United Kingdom. The part that favors Trump is that a status quo campaign is really boring. And for all intents and purposes, I mean, I think Hillary Clinton has a lot of substance about her and a lot of nuance about the world, but sometimes her speeches can be a little bit not the most exciting thing in
tiresome.
The world. Now, as we get closer to the election, within a month we'll be done with the conventions, and we will get into the debate season. And I think this debate season is going to be more important than most in that debates call for specificity. And one of the problems Donald Trump has is addressing issues with specificity. He speaks in broad generalities, and they're very, very appealing sometimes, and he's very charismatic, and he's much more dynamic as a character than Hillary Clinton is, but he does tend to have trouble with specificity. This whole issue about Brexit, he was sort of all over the map on it. Somebody asked him about Russia the other day, and he claimed that he knows Russia well. He had a Miss Universe pageant there a couple of years ago. That's the kind of stuff he's going to have to come across as much, much more knowledgeable than he has in the past. If you remember the last presidential election, the debates became very important because it really was about Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, two very smart people, very knowledgeable about the world, debating issues, and you had to sort of parse which one you liked, but they both seemed to be very well qualified. Up against Hillary Clinton, who is a better debater than Barack Obama ever was, Donald Trump may start to show that he's not as well versed on matters of the world as she is. So this could work either way.
All right, we're going to see how it plays out. And by the way, Ali, I'll be live at the Republican and Democratic conventions in Cleveland and Philadelphia. We hope to see you there.
Very good.
At the two events. I'm also a national delegate to the Republican convention, so I'm going to be spending some time actually doing my show on the floor. So we'll get you involved there. I want to thank Ali Velshi for being with us. Hey, follow him on Twitter at Ali Velshi. That's all you have to do. Keep it right here on the John Fredericks Radio Network.